Hi, Kate Floss, citizen journalist, citizen um, self-made legal person, citizen historian. Today, we're looking at, the first thing that I'll say at the start of this is that tomorrow there's going to be a meeting at 7:30 p.m. New Zealand time, a Zoom meeting that we in live YouTube, and we're going to be talking about our Supreme Court, and we're also going to be talking about a man called Winston Peters, who has already sent the 1688 Will and Mary to the courts. He's won his case, and his case was on free speech, but there's some very interesting things in his ruling that are nothing to do with him. Part of the ruling was that Parliament could be held to account if they had made a law today that was in conflict with historical laws. You were allowed to go to the court if you had a point of fact of an issue about the current day law and the ancient law. If they were conflicting, we're permitted to go to the court. So that's how important these ancient laws are to us. So remember, at 7:30 New Zealand time, tomorrow night, Sunday, the 27th of 27th of November. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today, again, it's going to be our 1688 Will and Mary, and we want to talk about the way that the governments, including America and England and Scotland, Ireland, how they're taking our monies, our tax monies, and spending it on things that they're not supposed to be spending it. Now, when they pass a bill in Parliament, now everything that they pass in Parliament is called a bill, which has nothing to do with the will. The will of the people, the Will and Mary, is what restricts them. And Parliament is only allowed to make bills for us when the people have a will to get something that they want in their community. They want a new school, they want money for education, they want money to set up a new for their water or whatever it is that they want to set up. That's called a bill, and the Parliament has to pass a bill in Parliament to take our tax money to pay that bill for the will of the people. That's how it all works out. It's called the will and the bill. They make bills in order to uphold our will. When they make a bill, they put forward a bill into the Parliament, and the Parliament says, yes, the people want to pay that bill because that's something that the people want to have, right? That bill is passed in Parliament, and they take your tax money to pay that bill because of your will, all right? Now, whenever they pass that bill and then they take that money that was from your will and they use that money for something else that wasn't your will, that's a misappropriation of funds. And that comes under our 1688 Will and Mary. So I'm just going to show you an example of how this has occurred in New Zealand, but it's also occurred in England, it's occurred in Scotland, it's occurred in Ireland. Now, all our countries are interconnected. So it's very, very important that you realize that nothing that happens in New Zealand doesn't happen in England, Scotland, Ireland, because they're in the process of destroying our countries so that they can bring down the Commonwealth, so that America and their cronies can take over our countries and all of their lands. Now, so there's a lot going on, but we'll just try and stick to this for today. It's just supposed to be a quick video, about 10 minutes. So I'll go to my share screen, and I will go to my windows, and then I'm going to go to all right. Oh, hang on, I'll just move this one over here. That's what I'll do, and then I'll be able to get to that one, right? So I'll share my screen here, and then this one's talking about here the COVID fund. Oh, not that we can't do that one. So the COVID fund will go to the Scoop. This is from Scoop New Zealand. I'm not sure if the video will be allowed if I'm showing this, but what it's just saying here is that the government's decision, this is from the Scoop News on the 3rd of November 2022, the government's decision to quietly raid the COVID-19 response and recovery fund to gussy up controversial Three Waters plan, where they're trying to take all of our New Zealand waters and put it into the hands of a certain group of tribes in New Zealand, and the New Zealand people that are born to New Zealand will have no power over their own water anymore. Now, this was water that was already paid for by our ancestors hundreds of years ago, so that we could all have water and water resources and water facilities. And that was done by the will of the people. Now, there were 70 million, they changed the COVID rules for the COVID fund so that it could spend 70 million or more on Three Waters costs, including millions on public relations and policy advice. Now, one of the people that, one of the ways that that money may well have been spent was on a, all right, I won't go there. Okay, so it doesn't really matter how the money was spent, but if you look here on the 1688 Will of Mary, how is that illegal in the Cabinet Manual? In the Cabinet Manual, it's illegal because that's called levying money. It's called it right here. It's called that the levying money for or to the use of the Crown by pretence of prerogative, without a grant of Parliament for longer time or in other manner than the same is or shall be granted, is illegal. That is exactly like I've just told you before. What that means is when they take your money, that your will, that you said, yes, it is our will for this money to be used for this COVID response. And then when you've already said that that's your will and it's already been passed in Parliament, they come around the back door and they dong you right up the ass. And that's when they change the law so that it can use that money to appropriate it to other services which they had no money for. And why did they have no money for it? Because the Three Waters is not the will of the people. So in order to drum up the campaign to get all of the documentation needed to get this Three Waters bill into the Parliament, they first needed money to drum up all of that stuff that they needed, all of the experimentation, all of the campaigning, all of the meetings, all that had to be paid for. And since nobody had the will for that to be done, they weren't able to get all of that background paid for by your tax money. So what they did is they created this COVID response. They then approved the COVID response. They then changed the law for the monies to be used for other purposes. They usually use these words, and other things. COVID response and other things. And the other things can be also anything that they want. They then take that money for the and other things. They use that to do the PR campaigns for the Three Waters, to get all the data that they need for the Three Waters, to create meetings across the country for these Three Waters, and they get all the legal fees paid for the Three Waters using your tax money that was not of your will. Then when it's all done, they're now taking that to the Parliament and getting the Parliament to vote on passing this Three Waters. But the fact of the matter is that they never would have gotten to the vote of Parliament in the first place if they didn't use your tax money illegally for a bill that was not your will to be approved. So this is why this 1688 Will and Mary is so important, because it's the will. It actually doesn't come from a right, it comes from a will, and it's the will of the people that decides what you want to send to Parliament for them to decide on. And then when it gets, the will gets to Parliament, then they decide on what the bill's going to be. But what they're doing now is they're taking the money and using it to create what you should be creating yourselves. and then they're sending it to Parliament for the bill when it was never your will in the first place. Now, this is the only way out of this, is to get people into the courts with the 1688 will and marry, and that comes under levying money, that levying money for or to the use of the Crown by pretence of prerogative without a grant of Parliament for a longer time, or in other manner then the same is or shall be granted is illegal. That is in the Cabinet Manual. That has been, you have to go and find out who were the people that approved for this money to be used. Was it Grant Robinson? All of this. Now keep an eye over in England, because England has been saying, we also want to know the billions of dollars that were spent on COVID. We want to know every single business that that money was allocated to, and who were the owners of those businesses and who was involved. So over in England is the same, and over in America they're talking about the $1 trillion. They want to know where their trillions of dollars that are being sent to Ukraine, what are the businesses that this money is being used to support for Ukraine, and who are the people involved? For example, would Joe Biden be involved in one of those businesses that received monies to support Ukraine? So this all comes under, it's a very simple law, it all comes under the 1688 will of the people, under the levying of money and using it for another manner by which the will of the people was not agreed on, and then the bill has been used for things that we didn't give them permission to make that bill for those things. All right, it would be no different than if the government gets, if you went and said to the government, I've got a school and I've got these children and we need food for these children and we've got no food, and the government give $100 million, or maybe they gave $1 million to that school to pay the food. Now, that school took that money and used that school to buy sports equipment in another company that they were invested in, that sports equipment company, and they bought sports equipment with that money to boost up their company. It doesn't even matter that they used the sports equipment for the school. The government didn't give them the money to buy sports equipment, number one. Number two, they were invested in the company that provided the sports equipment. And number three, the government would never have given the money for the sports equipment for a company that people that were working at the school were personally invested in. You see, that's what's going on. So it's no different from that. And then those people in that school would be held liable, and they would be sent to the court, and it would come under fraud, because they used the money for something that the government never approved them to use it. They only approved for the food for the children and nothing more. So this is a very, very serious thing that they're getting up to in Parliament, among other things. I'm going to leave that there. It's supposed to be a short video. Remember, we've got a big video coming out tomorrow about the 1688. We're going to be doing two things. They're talking about a new constitution in New Zealand with this Declaration of Independence that they reckon was created in 1835, called the Whaki Pūtanga. Then over in Scotland, now don't forget about Scotland. Over in Scotland, a new law has just been passed. I've just printed it off here. I've got the new law here that England has just passed a law that they're not permitted to have another referendum to go independent. They lost the last referendum, and they're talking about, this is exactly the same thing. Over in Scotland, they took funds from the Scottish people. They held a referendum to ask if they wanted to go independent. The Scottish people said, no, we don't. They won it. And then the Parliament turned, Liz Truss in the Parliament, she turned around and used a whole bunch of taxpayers' money to drum up support, to write laws, to create legislations, to get lawyers to work on creating another referendum, and all of that. She used all that money when a referendum had already been lost, and they would not respect the will. They didn't respect the will of the people, and they continued, when they got their seat in Parliament, they continued to go and use tax funds to drum up support for their wish to leave the British Parliament and leave the 1689 will and Mary, and that also comes under levying money for that which it was not supposed to be used. And they lost billions of dollars on this, and then it finally went to the UK court, who said you already had a referendum, you lost that referendum, and you're not allowed to have another referendum, and you've spent millions of dollars on supporting another referendum when you already had the referendum and you didn't respect the will of the people. So there's a lot going on with how they're spending our money to create all this propaganda when they shouldn't be doing it. That money was not issued for that. We didn't give the money for those things. We gave the money for other things. So there's a big meeting about that tomorrow. There's going to be 2 meetings. One's the Winston Peters meeting talking about the free speech laws, and the second one is that they want to have this new constitution. One of the biggest questions that we're going to be asking them is, was the removal of the 1852 constitution that we had in the first place, that was removed in the middle of the night, was that removal even illegal in the first place? Before you start talking about a new constitution, let's talk about the illegal removal of the old constitution first. All right? So we got a lot of things to talk about, mate. They're going to be long videos, 3, maybe 4 hours of your time. We only want the people that are in boots and all. We don't want tire kickers in our meetings. 7:30 tomorrow night. Kate Floss, and we changed their name to the Cameo team. Kate Floss and the Cameo team, that was by Maxine. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. Come on in, but that was Nania Mahuta and a couple of those others involved with this Three Waters trying to steal the New Zealand water from the New Zealand people and putting it into the hands of a single tribe where they're going to make millions and millions and billions of dollars. And there's a lot going on. All right then, Kate Floss signing out, and keep that Will and Mary on your mind. All right. Give my best lot. Hang on.